Talk. I'm your host, Rob, and today we're diving into the latest global reports from all around the world, and we aren't just watching the news. We're breaking down the history and the why behind these headlines to give you a deeper educational perspective. With that said, let's get to the analysis. Educational commentary and analysis falls under Fair Use Section 107.
For the Middle East, because a new destination may have different requirements.
Some of the fruit is returned to South Africa, but the local market can't absorb all of the produce. While the citrus industry is preparing to harvest and ship tons of fruit that is meant for the comes next for a region that accounts for about 20% of South Africa's agricultural exports.
Hello, I'm Sami Zaidan. You're watching Al Jazeera live from our Doha headquarters with extensive coverage of the US-Israel conflict with Iran. Here are the latest developments now.
They called. I didn't call. They called. They want to make a deal.
US President Donald Trump postpones military attacks on Iran's power plants, saying there have been good and productive conversations to end the war. Tehran denies any talks ever took place. The Speaker of Iran's parliament calls Trump's claim fake news. Financial markets rebound around the world after Trump's announcement. Oil prices dropped and US indices are climbing.
Another war without congressional approval. Donald Trump says he's in charge of how the conflict with Iran started and how it'll end. On This Is America, we'll look at which branch of government should hold the balance of power.
Thank you, everyone, for joining. Welcome.
US President Donald Trump says talks have been held between Washington and Iran, and that a deal
Donald Trump
could
says a lot.
follow to end the war. Well, Trump's comments came soon after he extended a 48-hour deadline.
I wouldn't necessarily
for Tehran
believe
to
everything
reopen
that he
the crucial
says.
Strait of Hormuz, or face attacks on its power plants.
We are now having really good discussions. They started last night, a little bit, the night before that, and I think they're very good. They want peace. They've agreed they will not have a nuclear weapon, et cetera, et cetera. But we'll see. You have to get it done. But I would say there's a very good chance. And it began when I said that I won't be. We were planning tomorrow on shooting down some of their power plants, and we're going to hold that up. Hopefully, we won't have to do it.
Tacos. Free tacos for everyone.
Us, including the Middle Eastern allies that
The
have
mirror?
been very good to us, including Israel, that's been a great partner in this fight. They've really been a good partner in the fight. They fought hard. But we'll see what happens. I think there's a very good chance we're going to end up in a deal. And so we're giving it 5 days, and then we're going to see where that takes us. And I would say at the end of this period, I think it could very well end up being a very good deal for everybody. As good as if we went all the way and just literally annihilated the place, which if we don't have to do that, that would be a good thing, not a bad thing.
Iran says
Trump is
no
literally
talks have even
retarded.
taken place. The Speaker of Parliament, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, called Trump's claim fake news aimed at manipulating markets. And the Foreign Ministry says
Trump's good at
Iran's
manipulating
position on the
markets,
Strait of
that's for
Hormuz,
sure.
well, that hasn't changed, it says. Market reaction, though, to Trump's comments has changed, and it's been positive. Oil prices falling
today.
sharply, U.S. stocks rallying.
Till everyone finds out he's full
We
of
have
shit.
correspondents following the story in Tehran, Ramallah, Riyadh, New York, and Washington, D.C. But let's start first with our chief U.S. correspondent, Alan Fisher, at the White House. Alan, given the denials coming out of Tehran, is the White House giving any details about who they think they're having really good discussions with, even reaching 15 points of agreement, Trump says?
Well, Donald Trump says the person they're speaking to is credible, that he has demonstrated that with things that have happened over the last couple of days. He did talk about how he doesn't want to name the person that they're speaking to because he said he might be killed.
Killed by who?
In mind that it's
Trump calls the
him and
shots.
his Israeli allies that are carrying out the attacks, targeting some of the Iranian government's top figures. He might have a say in that. But he said he'd wiped out the first two layers, essentially, of the leadership in Iran. But now they were dealing with someone that they felt they could make a deal with. Now, Donald Trump says that the discussions are being led by Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff. They're the two people who were in place before the war started 23 days ago. And of course, at that point, the Omanis said they were very close to a deal between the two sides, which would include no nuclear weapons, a stop to the enrichment of uranium, some sort of limits on Iran's missile program, and various other issues which they believed were very close to being pushed over the line. Exactly the same things that Donald Trump says they have negotiated over the last 48 hours and are hoping will pan out over the next 5 days to be a much more comprehensive deal that will bring an end to the war.
Alan, help us take a step back and reflect on how much of a massive change in messaging, in rhetoric from the White House, from the US president has taken place, and how close it's taken us back to where we were before the US and Israel launched this attack on Iran.
Well, let's talk about the last 72 hours. I mean, you'd be forgiven for feeling a bit of whiplash. On Friday evening, Donald Trump said the Iranians were looking for a deal. He was not about to give them one. There was talk at that point that there were some discussions, that something was going on, but the Israelis had called the White House and said, don't make a deal. Then on Saturday, we got news from Donald Trump on his Truth Social posting that unless Iran opened up the Strait of Hormuz within 48 hours, then they would bomb all their power
Thanks,
plants.
Keeper. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
One. They would, in Donald Trump's words, obliterate them. That seemed to be a really belligerent tone from the White House, that the situation was going to get much worse. But people pointed out that what Donald Trump was also talking about is a war crime under the Geneva Conventions. It is wrong to target civilian infrastructure in that way. And then
Trump doesn't care about war crimes, does he?
Announcing that he thinks
Keeper?
he has perhaps the basis of a deal. Now, he's saying he's not 100% confident, he's not guaranteeing it, but he thinks there is a very good chance that there could be a deal. Now, he's talking about a delay of 5 days to let this play out. That will allow him to get the Marines who are on their way to the region in place. But also, we know that Donald Trump's deadlines tend to be a bit elastic, a bit movable. So what we're looking at is maybe not what happens in the next 2 or 3 days, but the next statement or the next two statements that we get from Donald Trump and the White House.
Alan Fisher there at the White House. Let's take it over now to Ali Hashim in Tehran. And Ali, given what we've been hearing in terms of denials from Tehran, are there any indications from any of the Iranian leadership there that there's been progress, even indirectly, in indirect talks?
Well, Sami, at the beginning, there were at least 3 hours of silence here in Tehran, whereas we didn't hear anything from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or any of the officials. Later on, we started hearing from the Foreign Affairs spokesperson, Foreign Ministry spokesperson, Ismail Baqai, who denied that there are any direct negotiations or any meetings, and said that there are some states in the region who are conveying messages. The same applied to Mohammed Bakr Khalibaf, the Speaker
Which
of the
regime
Parliament,
do you guys
and,
trust more, to tell the truth?
right
The
now
Iranian regime or the Trump
to,
regime?
de-escalate
Let me know in the
Tehran.
chat.
Actually, he was, and now he's taking more presence. Khalibaf linked these reports to the prices of oil. However, there is a website linked to the Foreign Ministry. It's called Iran Nuances, that mentioned there were some messaging going on, and there was an idea of bringing together J.D. Vance, U.S. Vice President, and Mohammed Bakr Khalibaf, Iran's Speaker, together in Pakistan. Now, we've seen some communication going on between the Prime Minister of Pakistan and the President of Iran, Mr. Pezeshkian, also the foreign ministers of both countries. What we are aware of through sources who spoke to Al Jazeera here in Tehran, that Egypt and Turkey and Pakistan are very active in these efforts in order to bring together the Iranians and the Americans. However, there are many issues still on the that aren't yet finalized. Actually, most of the issues are not finalized, but the main issues is including the United States acknowledgement that this was an aggression against Iran. This war was an aggression against Iran, and
It was.
also the payment of
Trump says there's 15 points that they've already agreed on.
Destroyed in Iran, plus Iran reserves its right in closing the Strait of Hormuz, and this is just as a precautionary measure in case of any U.S. adventure. So these are the main points we're hearing, but just quickly to wrap, we know that there are many strings attached to this conflict. It's not only about Iran and the U.S. There are the regional countries, GCC countries. There is also Israel. There's also Hezbollah in Lebanon, and many other issues that.
And no doubt, Ali, we'll get into all of them.
Months and weeks to negotiate.
But how is the change in U.S. rhetoric, which was talking just a matter of hours ago about obliterating Iranian power plants, how is that change in rhetoric being seen there in Iran?
Trump's nothing but a bully, washed up bully.
Well, to the Iranians, this meant that Mr. Trump has stepped back. And this meant to them that also their own warning and threat to retaliate towards the region and Israel by the same way, and to close the strait till their own plants are repaired. They thought that this is also one of the leverages they were able to impose, and that President Trump didn't want to see the prices of oil soaring more and more. There's another card that they've not played yet, which is the Bab el-Mandab Strait card. And to the Iranians, this other card will double the prices of oil. And that's why President Trump decided that it's time to talk now rather than talk later.
All right, let's thank Ali Hashim there in Tehran. Now, the Israeli military is saying it's launched a new wave of attacks targeting, quote, the heart of Tehran. There have been heavy strikes across the country on Monday. Emergency crews have been trying to pull survivors out of the rubble. Iran's Red Crescent says more than 81,000 civilian buildings have been hit since the war began. At least 1,400 people have been killed. Speaking earlier, President Trump said he thinks Israel will be on board with any deal he negotiates.
We just spoke to Israel a little while ago. I think they'll be very happy. This will be peace for Israel, long-term peace, guaranteed peace. If this happens, and I can't guarantee it, but I think it's going to. My life is a deal. That's all I do is deals my whole life. I think this is something that's going to happen. And why wouldn't it happen?
Because everyone hates you because you're a fucking demented lunatic.
So Donald Trump saying that he thinks Israel
and you started a war. You and Bibi. You both go fuck off.
Though, from the signals we're getting from Israeli officials?
Well, from the signals and whispers, no. But right now, there are no public statements contradicting Donald Trump, Sami, because that would be crossing a line the Israelis cannot afford at the moment. There was always an understanding in Israel that if the U.S. president decides to abruptly end the war, Israel would be in trouble because it cannot continue with the war. And if a deal is reached to Trump's liking, then Israel might have to swallow that bitter pill. In the meantime, we know that the Israeli military will continue to conduct strikes until it receives different instructions. That's what we heard from the army. And we are hearing that J.D. Vance, the U.S. vice president, has had 2 conversations with Benjamin Netanyahu in the past 2 days about this very thing, about the possibility of negotiations with Iran and maybe even reaching a deal. And of course, that gives Netanyahu a chance to reintroduce the red lines as far as he's concerned. Remember, the last time the
J.D.
US
Vance
was
is
engaged
useless.
in negotiations with Iran, the Israeli Prime Minister worked very hard to introduce those red lines, and in many ways he's credited with kind of scuttling those negotiations and instead going to the option of war. So for now, there's a lot of unease, although many unnamed sources, political sources in Israel, say we're not ready to call this quits, and we don't think the war is anywhere near
Yeah, that's
over.
never going to happen.
Thanks so much.
AIPAC is
Noor
entrenched
there
here.
in Ramallah. Oman's Foreign Minister Badr al-Busaidi says Muscat is working to secure safe passage arrangements through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran threatened earlier on Monday to lay naval mines through the Gulf should there be an attack on its islands or the southern coast. Reopening the Strait of Hormuz and allowing oil tankers to pass through the waterway has been central to Trump's recent threats against Iran. Al Jazeera's Rasul Sardar is in the Saudi capital, Riyadh. And Rasul, so we've been hearing that there has been signals about the Turkish foreign minister meeting with GCC officials, right? What are you hearing about any sort of mediation effort through third-party states?
Indeed, Sami. So it's a multi-track diplomacy that is on the way now. Just a couple of hours ago, the foreign minister of Turkey, Hakan Fidan, has received the ambassadors of the GCC countries and plus the Jordanian ambassador. So this is a continuation of what we have seen yesterday. There have been direct phone conversations between
Welcome
Hakan
back,
Fidan
Billy.
and the Egyptian
Love you.
foreign minister, Saudi foreign minister, and the Qatari foreign minister. So here I was talking to some of the diplomatic people, sources in Ankara, trying to understand the content of these conversations. So they were saying, well, all these efforts are focused on how to create a unified position of the region, not only GCC countries, not only Arab countries, but the region as well, and to coordinate the diplomatic efforts.
Yep.
And the reason for that,
Trump caused this whole mess.
what the war has shown to the region
Trump
is,
and Bibi.
in case of any conflict, it's not being limited between Iran and the United States, Iran and Israel, but it is tremendously affecting the region itself. And so the regional crisis should be resolved through the regional initiatives. And also, one key sentence that he said it's not necessarily about the deterrence, this unified position, not necessarily about the deterrence, but it's also about the trust-building process between the regional countries that from now on, whenever there is a crisis, there must be a common response. So in addition to that, so Hakan Fidan has been in talks with his Iranian counterpart and then the American officials as well yesterday. I specifically asked that diplomatic source who was the American officials on the U.S. side, says that the negotiators, Trump's negotiating teams, most likely Steve Witkoff himself. So at least we now know that there has been a confirmed indirect kind of communication between Tehran and Washington, and there has been messages conveyed through Ankara. But here, the regional countries are also saying that officials are saying this could be the last chance. If diplomacy fails, so there is a high possibility of a wider war in the region.
All right, thank Rasul Sardar from Riyadh. Now, financial markets, they're reacting dramatically to Trump's announcement. Major U.S. indices are trading around 1.5%.
If you're willing to work for Trump, you're a piece of crap, Billy.
They fell by as much as 13%.
She has no soul.
The U.S. will pause its strikes on Iran's energy infrastructure for a few days.
You cannot trust the USA or Israel right now.
Live for us in New York. So how are the markets now digesting what's been a roller coaster of different statements and signals?
Yes, as you said, investors jumped on the opportunity to buy stocks on the news that Donald Trump was winding down the conflict, or on the hope that Donald Trump was winding down the conflict after he promised that there would be no more strikes for at least 5 days. But I think it's important to pull back and look at the big picture. While we've seen oil prices fall and stocks rise today, just about 2 weeks ago, we saw a similar trend when oil prices were at that point approaching $120 a barrel. And President Trump said that the war was pretty much complete, and that sent oil prices down again. But when you look at the big picture for the past month, you'll see that the last 4 weeks have all shown oil prices trending higher and markets lower. So while that seems to be reversing today, it is just one day. It is only Monday, and Iran has already denied that that conversation took place. That's muted the gains somewhat. I think it's too soon to say we've definitely turned a corner, although, again, investors certainly see this as good news and they're reacting to it.
What's the bottom line for consumers here, Kristen, whether it's at the grocery till or the petrol pump?
Well, as you know, inflation is a big concern in the United States. It was before this conflict happened, and oil prices and petrol prices remain high. They have not started to come down yet. The average price at the pump across the country has risen about 30%. It varies a little bit from state to state. Diesel fuel used for big deliveries, trucks, trains, that's at an all-time, that's at higher levels as well, trending much higher. Jet fuel is at a 3-year high. So Americans are still paying more, and that's an issue for them.
That's an issue for Trump.
Flowing through the Strait of Hormuz.
That's why he wants a deal.
The full extent of infrastructure damage.
He knows he screwed the economy.
The full impact of this, we just don't know yet, and Americans are still wondering.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thanks so much, Kristen Salumi. Well, joining me now in the studio is Ross Harrison. He's a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C., and author of Decoding Iran's Foreign Policy. Good to have you with us. So where do we start, Ross? It's been quite a day. I'm sure you remember at the outset of this war, Donald Trump's messaging about how he won't talk and there will be only unconditional surrender, I think even in block capitals. We've gone from that to we're having really great talks. Is this a realization on the part of the White House that they cannot achieve their goals militarily on the battlefield?
Well, I think it's a recognition that they can't achieve all of their goals on the battlefield. But depends, Sammy, what the goal is, because if it's some kind
no
of
one knows what the goal is. Trump doesn't know what the goal is.
For the Iranian people and a better.
He started a war with no plan and no goals.
A different set of circumstances relative to the nuclear file and so forth. That can only be achieved through negotiation at some point in time. But the question becomes, Sammy, whether in fact all the parties are ready to de-escalate. Because part of the dynamic of how wars end is that all the parties have to believe that they can achieve more at the negotiating table than on the battlefield. And that oftentimes not all of the antagonists necessarily reach that point at the same time. So that is the danger here.
All right, but there's been, I think, you agree there's been some change in the U.S. rhetoric, right?
For sure.
What has prompted that change on the part of Donald Trump?
Well, it's hard,
Is it domestic pressure, or is it realization that this next step up on the escalation ladder might bring something that's very painful, not only for the region, but for the U.S. itself?
Well, it's I mean, I think the U.S. is already feeling pain, Sammy. So I think it's a recognition of all the things that you mentioned. And that is that the Gulf Arab states, where we're sitting right now in Doha, and Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, UAE, all of these states are feeling pain, and certainly these are allies of the United States, not only allies of the United States, but places where we have bases and investments. So, and as you indicate, it's affecting prices back home in the United States. And plus, the Iran actually took advantage of the tyranny of geography with the Strait of Hormuz and is basically holding the global economy hostage. So I think it's a recognition that the military options for opening up the Strait of Hormuz, which is the ultimate leverage that Iran has.
Well, we should remember before the war that the Strait of Hormuz was open,
of
right?
Course.
So the idea that the U.S. needed to go there to open it it doesn't sit pretty with the
logically
facts,
not quite right. I mean, one thing I think you can say about Donald Trump, he acts both as the arsonist and the firefighter. So in this case, he created the problem, not only him, but created the problem, and now he's trying to solve it. Right. So I think it's a recognition that even if they use military means, which they still might do, by the way, to try to open the strait, that won't solve the problem, Sammy, because ships are not going to flow to the degree they need to until it's no longer a combat zone. And if they use military means, it will
be a combat zone for years and years.
I think it might be
Who
important
knows?
to take a step back for a moment.
Trump really fucked everything up.
Realize what we're talking about, because as we look into Donald Trump's postponement of these strikes, let's remind viewers that as Ross just said, or as our correspondents have been talking about as well, attacks on civilian power infrastructure, a big issue, even a violation of the Geneva Conventions. Many Western leaders were critical of Russian attacks on Ukrainian energy facilities in recent years. You might remember in 2024, then US President Joe Biden condemned one such attack, saying the purpose of this outrageous attack was to cut off the Iranian people's access to heat and electricity during winter and jeopardize the safety of its grid. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, on that same attack back then, said, "I condemn this ongoing assault on Ukraine's energy infrastructure." And in January of this year, we had the EU Commissioner for Human Rights condemning a strike on Ukraine's energy grid, saying those responsible must be held to account. I recall the International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for Russian military commanders concerning attacks on Ukraine's electricity infrastructure. There's been something of a shift in at least US, if not Western, rhetoric when it comes to the illegality of targeting energy infrastructure,
Well,
right?
if you're suggesting there's a certain double standard, I think that's very clear. But I think there's something else going on, Sammy, and that is that, you know, we all grew up during the Cold War, post-Cold War period, and in the post-Second World War period, where international norms, international law, trusting the good offices of the United States. Those were things that we grew up with. And I think using that
Trump got rid of all the norms.
to think about the current situation probably is an anachronism, probably doesn't work. I think we're in some ways we might be going back to an early, if you look back to an earlier historical area where brutality was the norm. I mean, look through history.
Ross, what we're talking about, just to put it into perspective, is the well-being of millions of people.
Of course we are.
Whether in Iran, whether across this region, by first the US president opening the possibility of attacks on infrastructure, and then the Iranians threatening they'll do the same to the rest of the government. We're talking about millions of people, schools, hospitals, right? All of this on the line. Electricity.
But I think it's important to look at the dynamic, and hopefully what we're seeing now is a real opening. The danger here, Sam, as we were talking about earlier, is that to get all of the parties, yes, what's at stake are the lives and livelihoods of whole countries and millions of people. But I think it's important to look squarely at the facts and understand that it's a lot easier to make the decision to attack that infrastructure and
the United Nations is pretty useless.
Those lives than it is to get out, because there's each of the countries have to believe
They don't really do anything.
Battle that they've achieved something, so that doesn't happen again, and that they can make the case to their body politic, their people, that something has come out of this war that can take us to a different future. And that is the conundrum at the moment.
All right, thanks so much for coming in and sharing your analysis and perspective on that. Ross Harrison, Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C.
Thank you, Sammy.
An Israeli strike has demolished an apartment building in Tehran. Tawhid Asadi was at the scene.
Is an apartment building a military target? Is that something new?
By the Americans and Israelis, and here we are at one of the residential areas targeted earlier in the morning. And as you can see, the scope of damage and destruction is quite visible. Bodies were taken out and rescue teams are still working. The Red Crescent says more than 81,000 civilian units have been hit, most of them residential buildings. But the damage is not limited to homes. It also includes more than 270 hospitals and other healthcare.
Gas prices are still high here.
490 schools.
I haven't been out in a couple of days, but they go up fast, but they come down slow. So I'll be filling up today or tomorrow.
Figures put it at more than 1,400, but the real number is feared to be even higher.
At around 4:30 in the morning, we woke up for prayers. Suddenly, we heard a massive explosion. All the windows shattered and the doors were blown out of their frames. We rushed outside and saw that a missile had hit the area. An entire residential building had collapsed.
Meanwhile, in the capital, parts of the oil infrastructures, including fuel depots, were targeted, which caused serious concern about air pollution and the long-term risk of water and soil contamination. And speaking of infrastructure, US President Donald Trump recently threatened to target Iran's power plants, although he later said the strikes would be delayed. Iran says it will retaliate if that happens. But still, in case of such an attack, it will be ordinary citizens once again to bear the burden. Toida Sadi, Al Jazeera, Tehran.
The world's largest warship has arrived in Greece after a fire on board last week injured sailors and caused significant damage. The USS Gerald Ford carries more than 5,000 crew members and 75 aircraft.
Our most advanced warship taken out by a fire in a laundry room.
NATO base in Crete. US officials said nearly 200 sailors were treated for smoke-related injuries. The vessel has been deployed for nearly 9 months. It was sent to the Middle East as part of US operations against Iran. A pilot and co-pilot of an Air Canada plane have been killed after colliding with a fire truck while landing at New York's LaGuardia airport. Dozens of passengers have also been injured in the incident. Images from the scene show significant damage to the front of the plane. The US Federal Aviation Administration closed the airport until at least Monday afternoon local time.
Thanks everybody for coming to the stream. Please remember to like and subscribe. Much love to all of you.
Now of our top stories this hour. US President Donald Trump says talks have been held between Washington and Iran and that a deal could follow to end the war. Trump's comments came soon after he extended a deadline for Tehran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz or face attacks on its energy infrastructure. But Iran is denying that any talks have taken place. Financial markets are reacting dramatically to Trump's announcement. Major U.S. indices are trading 1.5% higher on Monday. Oil prices fell by as much as 13%. On news, the U.S. will halt strikes on Iran's energy infrastructure. Israeli attacks on Iran and Lebanon continue despite Trump's remarks. In Tehran, emergency crews have been trying to pull survivors from out of the rubble after strikes on Monday. Iran's Red Crescent says at least 1,400 people have been killed since the war began. Let's go live now to Washington, D.C. for our regular segment from the U.S. Capitol, bringing you deeper insight into the debates shaping America and the world. Let's go over to Phil and Anna for This is America.
Hello, this is
Well, they're
America.
running out of interceptors, aren't they?
Keeps a check on the president. But
That's the word on the
is it doing
street
that
anyway.
Right now? See, Congress is supposed to authorize any wars, but it didn't give the go-ahead to what is happening in Iran. President Trump said he didn't need it, and some are saying that it is simply rolled over and given up. This, as Congress is about to be asked for billions of dollars in extra funding. How on earth is that all going to play out? So much to unpack here. I'll have more later. But first, Anna Burns-Francis.
Thanks, Phil. This war could be over before Congress even has a say. President Donald Trump has announced the US and Iran are going back to negotiating table. More on that in a moment. Shortly, we'll be joined by our chief US correspondent, Alan Fisher, at the White House. Paddy Culhane is live for us from Capitol Hill, and Mani Rapolo is live from us in Washington, D.C. with the latest from the Pentagon. But first, at more than $1 billion a day, war is a costly business. And it seems the price has finally gone too high
my
for
money,
the Trump administration.
our money.
After the president's threat of even more heavy-handed strikes prompted immediate retaliatory rhetoric from Tehran, the White House announced a walkback to diplomacy.
We're doing a 5-day period. We'll see how that goes. And if it goes well, we're going to end up with settling this. Otherwise, we're just keep bombing our little hearts out.
Sure. Oh, keep bombing, keep killing innocent people, you fat orange fuck.
And concerns of lawmakers on Capitol Hill. It's no secret. Public polling shows the war's not popular, it's not cheap, and it's not about to be won by either side. In fact,
The Chevron CEO is saying today that the Iran war impact isn't fully priced into the oil market. Right.
Lawmakers were already aghast at a president pressing go on a war without consultation. Now they want to know just what he plans to do to exit an ever-escalating overseas entanglement. Let's go to our chief US correspondent, Alan Fisher, who is at the White House. Alan, Donald Trump talking about a deal to end the war, but this
Yeah, I'm sick of my tax dollars funding Israel.
Briefing for the Gang of Eight on the Hill. Donald Trump doesn't think he needs to do that. Normally, there has to be some sort of discussion about the possibility of using the War
Because
Powers
Trump
Act.
thinks he's a king, and he can
Donald
do
Trump
whatever he
believes
wants.
that the power sits with him, and he said many times in his second term that the power is with him. He has more power than he had during his first term. It's unlikely that, given there was very few discussions with those on Capitol Hill before he decided to go to war, that he would do it now he's deciding to come with a deal. And that's been clear because there's reaction from many people suggesting that they heard nothing at all about the possibility of reopening talks. Remember, it was only 72 hours ago that Donald Trump on social media said that Iran had asked for a deal and he wasn't going to give them one. Then on Saturday, he talked about how he was going to increase the bombing by targeting infrastructure like energy. Now he says he's ready to talk. He's not going to do it with any consultation with the Capitol Hill. He believes the power sits squarely right here at the White House.
All right, Paddy Colhane, I'll bring you in here. You're on Capitol Hill. What power do lawmakers actually have at this point?
Well, actually, Congress has a tremendous amount of power if they chose to use it. In fact, if they took a vote today, they could say the war ends immediately. That's under the War Powers Resolution Act. Now, they did have that vote. It passed, didn't pass, largely along party lines. And don't forget, Republicans support this president. They control the Senate. They control the House. Now, it might be a different story when it comes to that additional $200 billion. It might be more that Congress would need to approve. We've already heard Republicans sort of hemming and hawing and say, well, we have to look at the numbers, but we actually have to defend, we have to defend.
Israel still is pushing the war.
That said, this is a very unpopular war, as you mentioned. Majority of Democrats are against it. Majority of independents are against it. The only group where the majority says they're for it is Republicans. Well, let's not forget, Republicans are not the only votes that the entire House and third of the Senate is going to need for the midterms coming up in November. They've already started campaigning. And if you ask voters, what is the number one concern? What is going to drive you to the polls? Overwhelmingly, they say it is, in fact, the affordability crisis. This war is making everything more expensive, not just gas. So that's the backdrop that these lawmakers are going to be facing as they go to that critical vote.
After the war started, top Trump administration officials made their way to Capitol Hill to give a classified briefing to senators behind closed doors.
Yeah, $200 billion
Democrats
more
were not impressed.
I'm very
on an already $1 trillion military budget.
Have been unanswered. I was just shocked.
Republicans have so far refused to hold public hearings.
The concurrent resolution is not adopted.
Under the Constitution, only Congress can declare war. But after frustration with the expansion of the Vietnam War, Congress passed the War Powers Act in 1973. As laws go, the War Powers Resolution is fairly simple writing. After hostilities start, the president must issue a report to Congress, and then the president shall terminate any use of armed forces after 60 days. But an extension of 30 days is allowed under the law. Congress took a vote which would have stopped the war in Iran. It didn't pass. Most modern presidents have not asked Congress for authorization to launch wars.
Yep, food and gas are very high, and they're going to get higher.
It started with President Harry Truman in the Korean War. For Vietnam, Congress passed a law, but not an outright authorization. President Ronald Reagan did not ask Congress for permission to invade Grenada. Same for President George H.W. Bush in Panama, but Congress did authorize the first Gulf War. President Bill Clinton did not get congressional approval when it came to bombing Yugoslavia. President George W. Bush did get authorization to go to war with Afghanistan and Iraq. President Barack Obama launched strikes in Libya on his own. His administration argued it didn't need to go to Congress.
U.S. operations do not involve a number of elements traditionally associated with hostilities, including sustained fighting or active exchanges of fire with hostile forces.
But Obama did then ask Congress to attack Syria. It didn't pass. Now when it comes to President Trump and the war in Iran, Congress will have another chance to weigh in because the administration says it needs $200 billion to pay for the war and replenish supplies.
It's a small price to pay to make sure that we stay tippy-top.
Setting up what will likely be a partisan fight.
Small price.
Let's focus on bringing down housing costs, bringing down health care costs.
It's a dangerous time in the world, and we have to adequately fund defense.
The funding bill
Who made it dangerous? Trump did.
Trump's control over the Republican
You're cutting
Party.
all sorts of social services here in the United States, things that help the poor and the needy, and you're funding this crap.
Designed to be a separate but equal branch of government. Critics say right now, it just isn't. Patty Culhane, Al Jazeera on Capitol Hill.
All right, let's go to Manny Rapolo now, who joins us from Washington, D.C. Manny, there's been a lot of bipartisan concern about the cost of this conflict so far. Can you break down some of the numbers for us? What's the bill at?
Yeah, he stopped 8 wars.
It's becoming increasingly clear how expensive this war is becoming for the United States and for the American people. If we can run through some of those numbers, in just the first week of the war, it's estimated that the U.S. burned through somewhere between $11 and $13 billion. That's according to the Pentagon's own estimates. And this is really only covering certain operational costs, the cost of munitions. This doesn't cover the full price of sustaining a war. When we zoom out a little bit and we look at just into the third week of the war, the estimate there goes up to $18 billion. That number is actually much higher, but you get a sense of how fast these numbers are moving. Now, this is what Trump administration officials have referred to as a high-tech, high-burn conflict, the use of precision-guided weapons, bunker-buster bombs. But we have to take this into the context of the larger Pentagon budget, the defense budget, which sits between $800 and $900 billion. So $200 billion war funding add-on is a massive request, and that is the big question. How is this going to land in the ears of the American people who are concerned with not
Like
just
a
how
lead
long this war
balloon.
is going to last,
That's how
but
it's going to
long,
land.
how much it's going to cost?
Like the fucking
Manny
Hindenburg.
Rapolo joining us from Washington, D.C. Thank you. Alan Fisher joining us from the White House, and Patty Culhane on Capitol Hill. As we mentioned, the Pentagon is about to ask for $200 billion toward the war, as Capitol Hill's already digesting President Trump's message on Monday, wondering if it could all be soon over. Back to Phil in the newsroom to see how it's playing out in the media.
Yeah, quite a simple question here, and that is Congress doing the job it is supposed to do? And you've got to get a broad range of opinion, not just across media, but in some cases within media. For example, let's start with the Washington Post. There, it says the situation is testing the resolve of the Congress, which is controlled by his party. And it goes on to add, the administration will need to show a more comprehensive strategy ahead or risk blowback from Congress. That is quoting lawmakers. But that is the news side. Look what happens when you switch across to the opinion section, a slightly different take. War making is the president's business, not Congress's. And it goes on to add, the executive branch is too powerful, yes, but Trump was free to act against Iran. Right, up next, it is the Wall Street Journal, and it looks at another attempt just a few days ago to limit the president's powers. It says lawmakers were voting 48-53 against a war powers resolution led by Senator Cory Booker. The vote was largely along party lines, and it goes on to say the measure cited the administration's massive and ongoing operations in Iran and argued Congress had been sidelined as the situation escalated into war. And that is a view shared by the ladies of The View. Now, if you don't know this show, it's been on TV for a long time here in the United States. It's on every day on ABC. It's a panel of women discussing the news of the day, often political, often heated. And here's how one of their panelists feels about this whole situation.
Congress has ceded this power a long time ago, and I have a lot of criticisms on Congress, and this is one of them. If you want to be part of the conversation, don't hand your power over to the presidents, which they have done.
Right, next up, it is Time magazine looking to a moment of self-realization as Congress looked at how much power it actually has. Look, members of Congress were left confronting a familiar reality. They had been informed of the operation, but given no role in approving it. And it goes on to quote former President Barack Obama's Iraq director, saying, the president has really boxed us in and put us on the hook for things that we haven't discussed as a country. Right, let's hop on over now to The Daily Show. Now, this is actually a news satire show, but it's a big deal here in the US. It's been on TV for 30 years. It gets millions of TV viewers, billions across YouTube. That's its host, Jon Stewart, and this is his very unique take on how he feels.
This is Trump's whole presidency. He does whatever he wants, and then a few days later, Congress is like, excuse me. Roll your window down. Excuse me. Excuse me, sir.
Love Jon Stewart.
Excuse me. Excuse me, sir. You're not allowed to knock down the East Wing without a permit from the Homeowners Association.
Right, NPR has been speaking to lawmakers who say the president was right to go about things the way he did. One lawmaker saying the Constitution gives the commander-in-chief a great deal of latitude and power with regard to kinetic action. And that lawmaker continues to say, in my mind, he certainly hasn't exceeded that or even close as of now. And another lawmaker who puts it bluntly, look, you can't be halfway pregnant. We are in there. And that is a sentiment shared by the conservative news outlet Fox News. This analyst backing those lawmakers up.
Fox News.
Presidents since Jefferson have been boxing in
Really?
Congresses
Moron.
over their ability to start wars. I mean, they have a right to initiate combat operations. That's been accepted since the beginning of the Republic. Once you're in those operations, it's very hard to get that cat to walk backwards.
I
So
agree.
Republican lawmakers find themselves in a unique position here because this is all playing out against the backdrop of the midterm elections later this year. On one side, they've got the president. On the other side, they've got the constituents, some who do agree with the president, some who don't. But they need these constituents to vote them in. Ultimately, they want to keep their jobs.
Well, joining me now is Laurie A. Watkins, a former policy advisor to President Barack Obama, and Patrick Mara, the chairman of the Washington, D.C. Republican Party. Thank you both for coming in. Laurie, I'll start with you. Has Congress been kept in the dark?
Absolutely, Congress has been kept in the dark. This escalation is continuing. First, President Trump said that it was going to be a few days, then it moved to a few weeks, then it moved to 6 weeks. Now we're hearing that there's talks and negotiation, that there's going to be a ceasefire, even though Iran is saying no such talks have happened at all.
There's not going to be a ceasefire. Anybody think there's going to be a ceasefire? Let me know in the
Congress
chat.
received, DOD is putting out a
Not
$200
anytime soon.
billion request that's supposed to fund SM-3, SM-6 interceptors. We gave a lot of those to Ukraine to be able to defend themselves, and I supported that. Also, some of these network of sensors that are going to combat drones, et cetera, but that's only a small portion of that $200 billion. So where's the rest going? And if it was going to end quickly, why do we need the request for another $200 billion?
Good
so
question.
I think that the clear mission objective needs to be established. Congress needs to understand that, define end game strategy. The cost transparency needs to be laid out, risks to U.S. troops in the region, and escalation. This is not going to be just a blank check by Congress to continue funding this illegal war, in my opinion.
Look, I think lawmakers across the aisle would agree that nothing is a blank check in any conflict. Patrick, can I ask you here, though, given the stakes, the cost, literally, that we've just talked about, economically, on the U.S. economy that we are seeing, politically, geopolitically, was there an expectation, a fair expectation, that President Trump should have consulted with Congress more?
Look, in this case, I mean, Iran has been the world's leading terrorist regime since 1979. And I would say in this case, you can't exactly let members of Congress know what you're about to do in Iran.
Why not? Why can't you?
Because the leaks that would occur would be massive.
So he doesn't trust his own lawmakers?
I wouldn't trust my own lawmakers.
Really?
With the leaks in Washington are horrific. The leaks in Washington are horrific, and so
but this
under
is
the
not
war
just
power,
gossip in the schoolyard.
No. But under the war powers, he has 60 days, and then arguably another 30 days.
Yeah.
And so he is going to Congress. I mean, look, a resolution did go through Congress that did not pass, or came up in Congress in both the House and
Hopefully
the Senate.
some of it's going to Israel.
Halt the war. I think as we look at funding the war, this is when the money becomes real. Especially at the price tag, initial price tag of $200 billion. And so there will be significantly greater discussion among the Republican Party members, especially many of those members who opposed getting into.
I'm going to ask you a question in a moment, Laurie, but I want, Patrick, a follow-up from you first then.
Yeah.
Given that message today about developments, should President Trump be going and filling in the gaps now? Should he be talking to Congress more about what the plan is and what is happening?
Sure. Well, look, they have briefed congressional leadership, intelligence committee members. There's a lot happening in the Gulf, right? And so you have a Strait of Hormuz situation. You have a massive energy security situation, and you have Iran, who's just escalating the conflict. So Iran continues to hit Muslim neighbors with drones, with missiles. And look, I mean, I think President Trump is doing the best he can possibly do under the circumstances. Today, he has said that he has opened up to negotiations with Iran. I suspect that's through back channels.
I mean, some might argue these are circumstances of his own making.
That he started, exactly.
So, look, Iran...
If there are a bunch of gossips, though, Patrick, Laurie, should they be trusted at this
point?
point?
The Democrats are a bunch of gossips. That's the issue. I mean, it would leak in a heartbeat.
Don't the Republicans have the majority in the House and Senate, Patrick?
Yeah, but you have to brief both, and they did
So
brief
that's
both.
Anna's point, is that if he doesn't even trust his own members, and let's bring up Signalgate.
No.
Let's bring up all the leaks. But as we all can agree, because these are the facts, that the Republicans are in control of the House and Senate, and they are the chair people of these committees, in fact, in which the information would matriculate down to members of Congress.
Andy, they did brief the intelligence committees, and they did brief congressional leadership.
Okay. Who then
After the fact.
Who then is responsible, do you think, Laurie? Can President Trump be trusted to negotiate the end of this war? If things keep going, the communication lines, as they have been between Congress and the White House, if they keep going along those tracks, can President Trump be trusted to negotiate the end of the war?
No, I don't. I think we all can see that that's not possible. You can't trust anything that comes out of this president's mouth because he flip-flops every single day. You have Tehran right now saying that no talks at all have been communicated. So is that a lie? So when you can't trust your own president, that is a major problem, and that's what the American public is having a problem with right now.
Can I ask, what would you practically expect Congress to be able to do or to be given the power to do then in this case?
They would be able to put checks and balances and guardrails on this and not give a $200 billion check to our Defense Department and to this president to do whatever they want without specifying those points that I made about cost transparency, define end game strategy. What does that look like? And when you have Signalgate, for example, where they're not even using the appropriate channels or speaking in skips, etc., and you're having these kinds of meetings down at Mar-a-Lago versus the Situation Room, these are problems that our adversaries, they're ripe to look at these of, oh, you know, who's talking to who? Can we extract some of this information? This is not good. And I want to, the $2 billion a day is what this is costing the American taxpayers at a time when their health care has gone up triple, at a time when they cannot afford groceries, at a time when now the thing that he ran on, low price of gas, that's not happening either. The cost of housing, the cost of every single thing is rising, and people are looking at a $2 billion a day price tag, along with losing U.S. service members who we've already lost 13.
Okay, we'll look at the money in just a moment. Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, has already come out forcefully against any congressional interference using the War Powers Act.
I think
got to keep sucking Trump's cock.
Resolution right now would be a terrible, dangerous idea.
God forbid you do your job, man.
It would empower our enemies. It would kneecap our own forces. And it would take the ability of the U.S. military and the commander-in-chief away from completing this critical mission to keep everybody safe.
Now, this is Mike Johnson.
Everybody was safe until Trump started bombing them.
We've seen these comments years and years over multiple presidents. You worked for President Obama. He was accused of doing the exact same thing. So why is it different this time?
Well, during your opener, you pointed out very specific facts of, for example, President Obama went to Congress about Syria, right, and they voted it down.
But he didn't go over Libya.
Okay, that was it. That was a different issue, and I say that because it wasn't a long, protracted war that he's coming to the Congress saying, this is going to cost a $200 billion.
Call me devil's advocate. I don't think anyone anticipated, certainly the public messaging was that this wouldn't be a long, protracted war.
But that's the thing of what one of your other guests was saying. You can't walk back the cat, right, was his example. Once you get into this war, and that's what Donald Trump was banking on, is that once you get into this, then it's very easy to try to blame whomever, whether it's the Democrats or any Republicans who can be picked off, to say, well, now we're not going to fund. Oh, then you're against America. Then you support Iran. Then you support terrorist organizations, and you don't support our troops. I absolutely support our troops. I used to work in the Pentagon, for God's sakes. It's not that I don't support our troops. I want to know the information. The members of Congress deserve to know this information because they have to answer to constituents. And as you pointed out, we do have a midterm election coming up, and they will be held to account about how they vote. And so they don't want to be put on the record. They don't want to have to make a vote on this issue, but they're going to have to be.
It's a fair point, Patrick. They will be. And of course, this is an argument that can go both ways and has all the time. Ted Cruz, about the same decade or the same administration, saying that Republicans in Congress weren't consulted about previous conflicts.
And Joe Biden, bombed a bunch of Iranian-backed, bad actors. So he also violated the War Powers Act, as did, going back to Bill Clinton, also violated the War Powers Act. Look, as we proceed, though, I mean, certainly executive authority was exercised here, as all of the presidents in my lifetime, for the most part, have done. But there will be a greater need to bring Congress in should this be a protracted war. Now, the one thing I will say about President Trump is he is someone who legitimately hates war. President Trump
That's
opposed,
a
he
little
opposed,
no.
He hates war.
President
Okay.
Trump opposed the Iraq War before, during, and after the Iraq War. He is not someone who likes war. He does not like prolonged war. And so I suspect the administration is doing everything possible to make sure this conflict is as short as it can possibly be.
If he didn't like war, that's fine for a previous position. How do we get into
Thanks
this?
for stopping by, Divine. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
The world's leading terrorist regime since 1979. And we cannot allow them to have a nuclear weapon.
Who says they were close to a nuclear weapon? Trump?
Sure,
Bibi?
because they would argue that they were bombed and they were in diplomatic talks, and now the solution
and so they're
seems...
bombing other countries.
Hang on,
their
they
Muslim
were,
neighbors.
they were in
Because of
diplomatic
what our
talks.
military and the Israeli defense forces have done. Patrick, come on.
Iran, oh, come on. Iran has been a problem since I was a very little child.
And
That's the excuse you
You're
give for
still a
every
little
war.
child.
That's the talking point.
Let's just try and keep on track here. Patrick, a lot of people would say that they didn't disagree with the action being taken, but they were in diplomatic talks. We seem to have come full circle and gone back to diplomatic talks. How confident are you that President Trump can negotiate then, if he is saying there's 5 days to go, an end to this war?
I think, especially given what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz, I think a lot of other countries are interested in ending this conflict as expeditiously as possible. And so I think Europe, Japan, China, these are all countries that are very interested in ending this conflict. And so I suspect that diplomatic channels are open there.
Working hard. All right, before today, there was already an argument over the funding of this. There is always not just an ethical argument to conflicts, but an economic one, with the Pentagon reportedly asking for another $200 billion to fund war efforts. The Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, has said it's money that makes sense.
Well, as far as $200 billion, I think that number could move, obviously. It takes money to kill bad guys. So we're going back to Congress and our folks there to ensure that we're properly funded for what's been done, for what we may have to do in the future, ensure that our ammunition everything's refilled, and not just refilled, but above and beyond. I mean, President Trump...
Patrick, you wouldn't have thought it was a particularly palatable number to be floating around, given the economic situation in America, the price of gas at the gas station, and those midterms that everyone keeps mentioning.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the midterms are in November, but with that said, I mean, Congress has many fiscally conservative Republican members in Congress. So as this continues, as additional funding is needed, Congress will be a bit of a barrier for President Trump.
For President Trump, maybe, but what about those lawmakers? What decision do they make here? Do they stay loyal to, if the conflict continues, to President Trump's messaging around the fact that this is necessary, that it has to keep going, when they know that their voters in their home states will be feeling the pinch in the back pocket and will feel perhaps quite differently about being in a protracted conflict?
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, to be honest, it depends how they're feeling in September and October, more or less. But in this case, I think Congress does become much more of a barrier as we go further and further into this conflict. As I stated, there are a lot...
Congress shouldn't be a barrier, right? This is the functioning democracy.
No, but they can, as time goes on, first of all, the House only has a 2-seat majority.
Yeah.
All right, and the House is, I mean, you saw how they voted on the Speaker of the House, for example. It's extremely close, and there are Republicans who have concerns if this is a protracted conflict.
Laurie, what's your advice then for Republicans finding themselves up for re-election?
Look, Anna, independents are the ball game for this election and the midterms.
That's the story every election, isn't it?
Yes, but 62% of independents right now disapprove of this war and the way that Trump is handling it.
Most
Only
Americans don't want it.
31% of independents approve of this war. 60% of independents, 74% of independents fear economic fallout from this. And this is not just about oil. I'm really tired of everyone just continuing
I hope
to
Iran
focus
doesn't
on
let them
oil.
off
This
easy.
is about fertilizer. This is about ammonia. This is about helium. We have farmers across our country right now that are not able to plant soybeans versus corn. People probably don't know the difference about that, and I will save people's time here for that. But the difference between that is the kind of stock that is fed to, the kind of feed that's fed to our livestock. That's going to affect everything in this country. We're now going to have a supply shortage of protein here in the United States. No one is looking at the second and third order of effects here. It doesn't matter if this war ends tomorrow. There is damage that has already been done to the American people, and they are going to take this out on Republican members of Congress, and they know it's coming. And I have no faith that they are going to do the right thing and not continue continue to capitulate to this president.
Laurie, thank you very much. Laurie Watkins, former policy advisor to President Barack Obama, and Patrick Mara, chairman of the Washington, D.C. Republican Party. Thank you both. All right, accusations are still flying over whether Donald Trump overstepped his powers in deciding to go to war. Alex Baird has more on the social media.
A bid by Democrats for a second time to rein in Trump's war in Iran once again voted down. Cory Booker at the helm of
got that right,
failed
Dennis.
effort, calling out Senate Republicans online for failing to stop this reckless war and pledging to keep on fighting.
We do not have a king. We are a democratic republic with a constitution, and no one is above the law. This president cannot take us to war without coming through this body.
Republican Tim Cotton fighting on the other side to shoot Booker down, saying Iran has been killing Americans for 47 years and that the Senate should be rallying behind Trump. But just 12 hours after that failed vote, a request from Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth for $200 billion, a cat amongst the Democratic pigeons.
It takes money to kill bad guys.
Democrats saying that is an insult to every taxpayer and that without congressional approval, the US has no business in Iran. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal laying bare where she thinks that money needs to go, saying that's your taxpayer dollars going to war instead of education, food assistance, and healthcare. Congressman Jason Crow accusing Trump of treating American dollars like monopoly money, money that only the Republican-controlled Congress can approve to wire to the Pentagon. The question now, will they?
That was America, and that's all from DC. We'll head now back to Doha.
All right, guys, one more hour, and then I'm calling it a day. Please like and subscribe. Thanks, everybody, for showing up.
I'm Sami Zaidan, and you're watching Al Jazeera live from Doha with our extensive coverage of the US-Israel conflict with Iran. Here are the latest developments.
They called. I didn't call. They called. They want to make a deal.
US President Donald Trump postpones military attacks on Iran's power plant, saying there have been good and productive conversations to end the war. Tehran denies any talks ever took place. The Speaker of Iran's parliament calls Trump's claim fake news. Israel is continuing to carry out strikes on Iran and Lebanon, while Trump says he thinks Israel will be happy with a deal with Iran. Financial markets rebound around the world after Trump's announcement. Oil prices have dropped. US indices are climbing. US President Donald Trump says talks have been held between Washington and Iran and that a deal could follow to end the war. Well, Trump's comments came soon after he extended a 48-hour deadline for Tehran to reopen the crucial Strait of Hormuz or face attacks on its power plants. Iran says no talks have taken place. The Speaker of Parliament, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, called Trump's claim fake news, aimed, he says, at manipulating markets. And the foreign
I love when people troll Trump, even weird, disgusting regimes like Iran's.
Well, market reaction to Trump's comments has been positive. Oil prices fell sharply while U.S. stocks
still high.
rallied. From
Don't take the
Washington,
bait.
D.C., our chief
Tomorrow everything
correspondent
could
Alan Fisher
switch.
begins our coverage.
Do a 180.
So they called. I didn't call. They called.
They
want to
called.
make a deal.
After a weekend where the US president threatened to obliterate Iran's power infrastructure, a change of
They didn't call.
direction and tone.
Anybody
Donald
believe
Trump
that?
confirming talks are underway with a senior Iranian figure.
A top person. Don't forget, we've wiped out the leadership phase 1, phase 2, and largely phase 3. But we're dealing with the man who I believe is the most respected and the leader.
Mr. President,
I can't.
Mr. President, I know you've deployed.
Because I don't want him to be killed.
Trump's demands appear to be very
Yeah,
similar
they didn't
to
call.
what was believed to be on the table.
Trump
when the
needs an
Iranians
out
were negotiating
because
with
he's
both
sinking
sides
his
23
polling
days
numbers
ago
in his
before
party.
The war started. No nuclear
The American
weapon,
people hate him.
an end to uranium
34%
enrichment,
approval.
and restrictions on Iran's missile program, as well as other significant steps.
The first sense of a shift came early on Monday morning, Trump posting on his Truth Social platform, "I'm pleased to report that the United States of America and the country of Iran have had, over the last 2 days, very good and productive conversations regarding a complete and total resolution of our hostilities in the Middle East. I've instructed the Department of War to postpone any and all military strikes against Iranian power plants and energy infrastructure for
He's
a
so
5-day
full of
period,
shit.
subject to the success of the ongoing meetings and
He
discussions.
tacoed. That's all that
Trump
happened.
insists
Another
that there's a
taco.
possibility of an end to the war, but no more than a possibility.
We have a very serious chance of making a deal. That doesn't guarantee anything. I'm not guaranteeing anything. I'm not going to come out here in a week or 2 weeks and have you all say, oh, you said. I didn't say anything. All I'm saying is we are in the throes of a real possibility of making a deal.
Donald Trump is aware of the economic impact of the war on ordinary Americans. There is also the human cost. It's been reported he wants an off-ramp where he can declare victory. His deadlines have proven to be elastic. The patience of the American public might not be. Alan Fisher, Al Jazeera, at the White House.
We have correspondents following this story from Tehran, Ramallah, Riyadh, Baghdad, New York and Washington, D.C. But let's start with our chief U.S. correspondent, Alan Fisher, at the White House. Alan, it's been quite a day of statements. Given the denials coming out of Tehran that they're having talks with the U.S., any explanation from the White House behind you about who they think they're talking to and making great progress in talks with?
Well, they seem to make it clear they're speaking to someone that is respected, is at the top of the Iranian leadership, that has done something, according to Donald Trump, over the last couple of days that has proved he is credible. They say, of course, that they've wiped out the first 2 layers of the Iranian leadership, but they believe that they have someone they can do a deal with. Now, from the American side, Donald Trump has confirmed Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff are leading the discussions from their side. Those were the 2 people who were in negotiations with the Iranians 23 days ago, before the war started. Excuse me. And so, but listening to what Donald Trump is saying about the 15 points that have been agreed, a lot of them are points that were in place when the Omanis were negotiating between both sides, that genuinely believed they were very close to a deal. So many people are concerned, without going into the detail or getting much of the detail from the White House, that the deal that Donald Trump is talking about is the deal that was available 23 days ago. We just have to watch what happens, maybe not just over the next week or the 5 days that Donald Trump has given as a deadline, but what the next statement and the next 2 statements are coming from the White House to see where this is actually headed.
And meanwhile, the messaging coming out of CENTCOM is very much one that the war goes on. Is that right, Alan?
Well, to be clear, what Donald Trump announced when he put out his Truth Social this morning was that they weren't going to attack the infrastructure. They weren't going after the power plants. Now, some people would say that that's actually a war crime. It's against the Geneva Conventions and could have left Donald Trump in real legal jeopardy internationally. But he did not say they were stopping the war or they were not going to prosecute the war any further. And what we're hearing is that CENTCOM are continuing to do just that. They have a list of targets, even though Donald Trump says they've almost obliterated everything. They have a list of targets they are working through, and they continue those operations and continue to release video of those operations. The war isn't over. Donald Trump says he believes there is the chance of a deal that could bring a war to an end, but for the moment that is not guaranteed, and so the fighting continues in Iran.
And that's Alan Fisher. Let's take it now to Ali Hashim. He joins us from Tehran. And Ali, you know, Iranian officials they have a very different narrative on what the state of play is vis-a-vis any claims about negotiations, right? They're saying it hasn't happened.
Well, for the Iranians, it hasn't happened, but there is a possibility that it could happen. So there is something here that is, in a way or another, a common factor, which is the possibility of negotiations. For what President Trump said about meetings or direct negotiations or whatever kind of negotiations, for now, the Iranians are saying, no, this is fake news. This is what Kalibov said, the Speaker of the Parliament, whose name is now being circulating as the possible counterpart or the person who's going to sit face-to-face with J.D. Vance in Pakistan. So for the foreign ministry, they're saying that there are several regional countries that are interested in conveying messages, and Iran is open to listen to messages. Ghalibaf said it's fake news, there were no negotiations. However, what we understand now is that there is a real effort going on. Egypt is playing a strong role, a centric role. There's also Turkey and Pakistan, where there's a possibility a meeting might happen. In Iran, everyone is on board. It's not that one person decided to talk to the Americans and the others are not on board. No, there is something systematic. It's something that represents the establishment. However, there are many conditions yet to be met. And based on these conditions, there'll be a meeting or not. So these are the issues that we are hearing. We're waiting actually to hear more. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi just spoke to several other foreign ministers and counterparts in the region.
There's been, Ali, a huge change in the US rhetoric, right? From bombing power plants to, hey, we're having good talks and we're reaching agreement on 15 issues. How is that change in rhetoric being seen there in Tehran?
Well, in Iran, this is presented as an American retreat. And that President Trump, who was threatening to strike the power plants if Iran is not going to open the Strait
Looks
of
like a
Hormuz,
retreat
is
from
now
here.
retreating and saying, well, there is a possibility.
Not really a
talk.
retreat, a
This
taco.
is on one side. The other side is that there are actually big questions here in Tehran with respect to the possibility of a deal with the Americans, especially that in the last two times the Iranians went to talk, went to the table was turned on them, and the wars were waged. So in a way or another, there is a mistrust, and especially with the Iranians, confidence plays a lot of role when it comes to diplomacy. So they work a lot on building confidence, and whenever there is no confidence, they are not in a position really to sit on a table. So these are big questions now, especially that this conflict is not a conflict between America and Iran only now. It's a conflict that has Israel in it. It's a conflict that has the GCC countries now in it. It's a conflict that has Hezbollah in it. And you have the issue of the Hormuz Strait, and you have the issue of the nuclear facilities, Iranian nuclear facilities, highly enriched uranium, ballistic missiles. Iran's guarantees that there is no war going to be on them in the future, and that this is not going to be repeated. Israel's concerns towards Iran, the Gulf countries' concerns towards Iran after the attacks on the infrastructure in the Gulf. So we're talking about something that is very multi-layered and very complicated, a package full of items, and each item needs alone weeks and months of negotiations.
And that's Ali Hashim in Tehran. Now, President Donald Trump says he thinks Israel will be on board with any deal he negotiates.
Yeah, is he going to keep sucking Bibi's cock?
Spoke to Israel a little while ago. I think they'll be very happy. This will be peace for Israel.
Bibi is never
Long-term
happy.
Peace, guaranteed peace. If this happens, and
Sure,
I can't guarantee it,
Trump's
but
going
I
to
think
bring
it's going
peace to the Middle East after
My life is a
3,000
deal.
years.
That's all I do is deals my whole life. I think this is something that's going to happen. And why wouldn't it happen?
Such a brain-damaged
And the Israeli
egomaniac.
Prime Minister gave a statement just a short time ago.
Earlier today, I spoke with our friend President Trump. President Trump believes that there is an opportunity to leverage the great achievements of the IDF and the US military to realize the goals of the war in an agreement that will safeguard our vital interests. In parallel,
Hey, look,
we continue
Bibi's still
to attack
alive.
both in Iran and
Yay.
Lebanon. We are methodically dismantling the missile program and the nuclear program and continue to hit Hezbollah hard. Just a few days ago, we eliminated 2 more nuclear scientists. We will safeguard our vital interests in any agreement.
Noor Aude joins us now near Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. So, Noor, I'm sure you heard him choose his words carefully there, saying the US president believes he can leverage the war for a deal. Does Netanyahu believe that too? Is it clear?
Well, not so much. The key word in that 30-second statement, Sami, is we will safeguard our vital interests. Note there that he spoke about the assassination of 2 nuclear scientists as a military achievement. Israel has its own goals set in the war. Netanyahu is personally invested in this war, and he basically, is betting his political career on it. So there's a lot riding on this, and there isn't a lot of enthusiasm for a deal, because a deal that would keep the Islamic Republic is a deal that means that Netanyahu failed. He promised Israelis Iran would be different, that people would rise up, would heed his call, would take to the streets. None of that has happened.
You can't.
He said that Hezbollah was
cannot
defeated
trust
in
them.
November 2024. Northern communities, 1.4 million Israelis in northern Israel, can attest that that simply isn't true, and many of them have already left northern communities in Israel because they simply can't deal with the barrages of rockets that keep coming to their streets and their towns. So a lot is riding on these coming five days. Israel plans to continue bombing Iran, and so one cannot really guess what they will bomb, whether they will provoke Iran, whether their military action will sabotage
What's
the
left to
talks.
bomb?
And in the meantime, of course, there are back channels.
They keep saying we've decimated and obliterated everything,
There
and yet
are
here we are.
conversations that are happening with the
Bombs
US
are still
Vice President,
falling.
with Donald Trump, as we now know, to make sure that Israel's red lines, which are many, are taken into account in any future deal, and that might complicate things moving forward.
Noor, we've seen in other scenarios where ceasefire deals have been reached that Israel continues its operations. Any indication about whether that is the thinking, especially with the sort of statement that you pointed out there when Israeli leaders talk about, hey, we're going to safeguard our interests in the event of any deal anyway?
Well, the thing is, Iran is different. Israel is used to taking on non-state actors, armed groups, Hamas, Hezbollah, and so on. And those, yes, it has had a lot of leverage and a lot of leeway with successive U.S. administrations to strike at will, to assassinate, to kill, to wage wars even, and now in Lebanon to threaten with occupying land. Iran is a different ballgame. It's a much larger country. It's a formidable adversary. In order to wage war, carry out an airstrike on Iran, U.S. involvement is necessary, even if it were just for operational reasons. So Israel can't just wake up and go bomb Iran and pretend that it doesn't need anybody to back it up. Israeli weapons rely on the U.S. It relies on billions of dollars in military aid. Israel's Iron Dome relies on, has already received about $1.6 billion in U.S. aid. So even the protection, the air defense system, is reliant on the U.S. It cannot take on Iran on its own, and that's why there is concern in the Israeli right wing, especially in this coalition government, about what happens next. Because remember, Sami, elections are in October, and that will be a day of reckoning if Netanyahu can't show some sort of decisive strategic achievement.
All right, thanks so much. Noor Aude there in occupied West Bank. The Israeli military says it's launched a new wave of attacks targeting, quote,
The Iron Dome did
heart of
fail,
Tehran.
and it's been
There have been
failing.
heavy strikes across the country on Monday. Emergency crews have been trying to pull survivors from out of the rubble. Iran's Red Crescent says more than 81,000 civilian buildings have been hit since the war began, and at least 1,400 people have been killed.
The Pentagon is
dramatically to Trump's
preparing to
announcement.
potentially send the
Major US
82nd
indices are
Airborne
trading
into
around
Iran.
1.5% higher
See
on
how that
Monday.
goes.
Oil prices fell by as much as 13%. On news, the US will halt strikes on Iran's energy infrastructure. Well, Kristen Salumi is live in New York for us. So how are the markets looking now?
it's been constant throughout the day. Oil prices surging, oil prices falling, markets surging. It's just the opposite of what we saw on Friday. So
And tomorrow to be the opposite again.
The market has been up and down.
Once tacos, everything changes.
Today, oil prices down.
It's almost like Trump is manipulating the market on purpose.
President Trump's declaration that he would postpone any further bombing of Iran. But it's important to pull back and look at the market big picture overall. 2 weeks ago, we saw oil prices approaching $120 a barrel. And then when President Trump said that the war would be wrapping up soon, they fell, only to rise again. So what we're seeing is markets have had negative weeks for 4 weeks in a row now. The Dow Jones Industrial Average on Friday was approaching correction territory, a loss of 10%. So today brings things up a little better. It offers a reprieve, some hope for investors, but it's only Monday, and it's a little too soon to say we're out of the woods just yet for investors.
All right, but as you were talking there, Kristen, we had some graphics up showing oil prices. Yeah, they may have gone down a little bit, but still higher compared to where they were at the beginning or before this war, right? So what is the bottom line here? What does this mean for people at the petrol pump?
Minimum $90 a barrel oil.
Yeah, that's right. Brent crude may have
Even
fallen
when this is
to
over.
$100 a barrel, but Americans are still paying about 30% more than they were before the conflict started. A month ago, they were paying 30% less to fill up their tank. Diesel fuel used in bigger industrial vehicles is costing even more. Jet fuel is at a 3-year high. So all of that takes a toll. And growth and consumer spending in the United States have remained relatively strong, but the concern has been that the longer this goes on, the more it'll affect prices not just at the pump, but across many sectors that rely on transportation to deliver goods and so on. So while today is seen as good news, again, until the Strait of Hormuz is open, we know the full extent of damage to energy facilities in the Middle East, and where this is going, it's maybe too soon to celebrate.
And that's Kristen Salumi for us from New York. Now, Oman's Foreign Minister Badr al-Busaidi says Muscat is working to secure safe passage arrangements through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran threatened earlier on Monday to lay naval mines through the Gulf should there be an attack on its islands or the southern coast. Reopening the Strait of Hormuz and allowing vessels to pass through the crucial waterway responsible for 20% of the world's daily oil shipments has been central to Trump's recent threats against Iran. Al Jazeera's Rasul Sardar is in the Saudi capital, Riyadh. So are you picking up signals there of a mediation
There is no good news anymore, man.
Rasul?
Indeed. So since yesterday on, we have seen that there are multi-track diplomatic efforts on the way. So first, it was a phone conversation between the Turkish foreign minister and his Iranian counterpart, Abbas Araghchi, and then for Hakan Fidan, the Turkish foreign minister has called the American officials. So we know that there has been messages conveyed between both sides, trying to understand the position of both sides and also seeing if there is a way for de-escalation and then ceasefire and then eventually maybe a peace settlement. But it was not only between Tehran and Washington. So Ankara has engaged with the regional countries as well. Talks with the Saudi foreign minister, Faisal, and then his Egyptian counterpart, and then the Qatari counterpart. And then there has been talks between Pakistanis and Turks. So today the Omani foreign minister has talked to the Iranian foreign minister. So I've been talking to some of the diplomatic sources trying to understand the content of the talks. They say that now the position is to create a unified joint stance toward this crisis. the fragmentations, the frictions, how caused tremendous damage to the region. And now the region sees that when there is a war between Iran and Israel, Iran and USA, it's not limited only between that capitals, but the region is paying a tremendous price. And that's why if there is going to be a diplomatic process and eventually if there is going to be a negotiating table, then the region has to be present at that negotiating table. So that's why now all of these efforts are focused on achieving one goal, a unified position, and to make sure that in any crisis, the region itself has the saying as it is being affected tremendously.
And that's Rasul Sardar for us from Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. Iraq's air defenses have intercepted a drone above the Kurdistan region. Nicholas Huck joins us live from the Iraqi capital, Baghdad. So any claim of responsibility as to who was behind the drone attack?
Not yet, Sami, but it has a hallmark of the Iran-backed militias here in Iraq. We're talking about several drones that were launched towards the city of Erbil. The target here is the U.S. consulate, and as we speak, there's plumes of smoke billowing above the U.S. consulate. It's unclear if it was hit, but what we know is that the U.S. air defense system, CRAM,
Everyone is laughing at Trump right now, man.
500 bullets a minute were launched in order to intercept these drones. Now, earlier during the day, Sami, there were U.S. airstrikes against positions of Iran-backed militias in the country, notably in West Baghdad, in the Anbar province, and in Saladin, which is about 160 kilometers north of Baghdad. So we're seeing it tit for tat with the Iran-backed militias continuing to target U.S. positions. Now, they've stopped attacking Victory Base, which is 20 kilometers west of Baghdad. In a statement, they said, because the American soldiers and the NATO forces have evacuated, they're no longer targeting that area. But Erbil, certainly today, is a target. Meanwhile, the prime minister here in Iraq gave an interview to the Italian newspaper Corriere della Sera. And he said that
thanks, Arnold. Don't forget to like and subscribe, buddy. Thanks for stopping by.
The international coalition that fought ISIL, because these Iran-backed militias in Iraq want to see American soldiers leave Iraqi soil. So in this interview, he says, once there are no longer any foreign military contingents fighting on Iraqi soil, it'll be easier to disband these armed elements. And what's clear, Sami, is that Iraq is another front line or another battleground for the Americans in this fight between the U.S., Israel, and Iran. Sami?
All right, thanks so much. Nicholas Huck there from Baghdad.
Yep,
well, joining me
I
now
agree.
in the studio is Ross Harrison. He's a senior
AIPAC's
fellow
a big
at the
problem
Middle
here in
East
the
Institute
States.
in Washington, D.C., and author of Decoding Iran's Foreign Policy. Good to have you back with us.
Thank
so,
you,
Ross,
Sami.
it's fair to say, is it not, that there has been a massive change in White House rhetoric from talking about obliterating a country's power supply, power grids, to, hey, a deal is within reach and discussions are going good?
There has been. You're absolutely right. How real that is and how realistic that is and how much the president's rhetoric represents what's happening on the ground is a different question. And I think it's important to realize that
Okay, Arnold.
in order to get to
And
operationalize
what's
that
your
kind
point?
of optimistic rhetoric, that a deal is in the offing, it
You don't like the
requires
stream, but
tremendous
here you are.
complexity, because you've got various actors making decisions on the ground. Right? In the beginning of a war, it's fairly centralized, the decision-making. But over time, you've got different actors, and you have the potential for spoilers in terms of possibly Israel, who, if Israel does not want to enter the war, they could act as
Hey,
a spoiler.
Arnold, there's
So
a
it's
war
very,
going
very
on started by
complex.
Trump.
And
Where's
we have
Trump
to worry
today?
on the Iranian side in particular, because
Is he at the
of their
White House?
decentralized decision-making,
Overseeing any of this?
we have to look at
No,
possibility
he's at
of
Graceland.
freelancing. So
Grace-
pulling all of the pieces
Give
together.
me a break.
Maybe too early to celebrate is what you're
It
saying.
would definitely be too early to celebrate. It's not too early to have hope. We should always have hope. Yesterday seemed hopeless, but today we have some hope, and we should not hang on to that. We should work towards possibly turning that kind of space into some kind of a possible convergence of...
What's prompted, regardless of how realistic the change in rhetoric is, how What has prompted that? Is it a realization on the part of the White House that taking that next step up the ladder of escalation, bombing power plants in Iran, is going to provoke something?
Has he? Explain that one, Arnold. How has Trump already won?
But for the U.S., or is it domestic pressure, or how, when you...
I don't think it's domestic pressure yet. I think, Sammy, it's a recognition of very few really good options. So yes, the pressure is building. I mean, you have pressure building. The Iranians are masters at adaptation, and they know they can't compete militarily. So what did they do? They regionalized the war, expanded
asymmetrically, basically.
Asymmetric. Well, they took a strategy they used in the civil war zones in Syria and Lebanon. They kind of guerrilla strategy, and they moved it up to the region. And the missiles that are coming here in Qatar and elsewhere. Plus, they found out their main leverage point, which is the Strait of Hormuz. So what they're trying to do is to build that kind of pressure and use that in order to gain concessions. So they have to gain some kind of concessions. And for them, I think, knowing the Iranian side of the story, I think what they need to do is be able to survive, say they survived, the regime has to survive, and then also leave this battle or this war having recreated deterrence, something they had lost at the end of the June war of 2025.
Right. Does this mean that the White House has realized there will be no total, complete surrender, something that Donald Trump was talking about, even saying he's not going to have negotiations? Have they realized now that actually they're not going to achieve all their goals on the battlefield, and they do need to talk?
Well, that's right. I mean, if you think, Clausewitz, the ancient
the USA was never going to be hit, Arnold.
War is the continuation of politics by the
bullshit
region.
argument.
Not everything can be achieved militarily. And I think even militarily, I think it's a recognition of a couple things.
Well, yeah, financially we'll be hit.
Very few really good options. And one of them is that even if they would take the strait in some way, which it's very, very difficult to do. I'm not a military strategist, but let's assume they would send troops there or to Karg. That would not solve the problem, Sammy, because if the problem is the lack of the poor flow of shipping, 5% is getting through at this point. That's not going to change when U.S. troops would arrive, because insurance companies aren't going to insure the ships. The companies aren't going to want to go through a battle zone. So I think it's a recognition on the part of the White House that this problem, the economic problem that's ensuing from this, cannot be solved only militarily. I think. I mean, I would, if they're thinking rationally. I'm trying to basically look at reading a little bit of King Lear these days in terms of irrationality.
It's funny you should mention that. Is there any reflection on whether, within that circle of power in the US, or whether the US has made, to put it mildly, a colossal mistake, especially when you look at statements like from the UN Secretary General, 9 UN experts at the beginning of this war who are characterizing this as an illegal attack by the US and Israel, a violation of the UN Charter, and so on.
Well, that's for sure.
Bricks are growing every day.
Where those norms may be anachronisms of the past. But I think what we do see a pattern of, for sure, strategically, is that this administration has miscalculated Iran consistently, going back to 2018. So whether, in fact, now the other thing that I think is not just the decision-making calculus of Donald Trump, I think it's also symptomatic, Sammy, the fact that the institutional competence that used to exist in the State Department on Iran, in the intelligence community, the National Security Council, those institutions have been degraded to some degree of their expertise. And even the expertise that lives in those institutions has not, we don't believe, has been brought properly to bear into the decision-making process.
Right.
So there's a lot of innovation and improvisation occurring, but as we talked about earlier, with millions of lives at stake.
Right.
And it comes back down to the Iranian behavior has been fairly patterned and predictable. Predictable. The Israeli behavior, in many ways, is predictable. Now they have the 747 called the United States propelling them, but they're predictable. The imponderable is Donald Trump, and that's what hangs in the balance over the next couple of days.
As well as the
because he's a nut and a lunatic.
Absolutely.
Lives and livelihoods facing the possibility of attacks on their energy infrastructure, right?
And the future of their countries, the future of their nations. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much for coming in and sharing your perspective with us. Always good to hear from you. Thank you, Ross.
Thank you, Sammy.
And you're watching Al Jazeera's continuing coverage of the conflict between the US, Israel, and Iran. A reminder now of our main developments this hour. US
Half
President
hour,
Donald Trump
guys.
says
We're
talks
done
have
for the
been
day.
held between Washington and Iran and that a deal could follow to end the war. Trump's comments came soon after he extended a deadline for Tehran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz or face attacks on its energy infrastructure. But Iran is denying that any talks have taken place. Financial markets, though, are reacting dramatically to Trump's statement. Major U.S. indices are trading 1.5% higher on Monday. Oil prices fell by as much as 13%. On news, the U.S. will halt strikes on Iran's energy infrastructure. Israeli attacks on Iran and Lebanon continue despite Trump's remarks. In Tehran, emergency crews have been trying to pull survivors from out of the rubble after strikes on Monday. Iran's Red Crescent says at least 1,400 people have been killed since the war began. Tawhid Asadi visited the scene.
This is day 24 since the commencement of a campaign of airstrikes by the Americans and Israelis, and here we are at one of the residential areas targeted earlier in the morning. And as you can see, the scope of damage and destruction is quite visible. Bodies were taken out and rescue teams are still working. The Red Crescent says more than 81,000 civilian units have been hit, most of them residential buildings. But the damage is not limited to homes. It also includes more than 270 hospitals and other healthcare facilities, more than 490 schools, and even 17 buildings belonging to the Red Crescent itself. The total death toll after weeks of airstrikes remains deeply concerning. Official figures put it at more than 1,400, but the real number is feared to be even higher.
At around 4:30 in the morning, we woke up for prayers. Suddenly, we heard a massive explosion. All the windows shattered and the doors were blown out of their frames. We rushed outside and saw that a missile had hit the area. An entire residential building had collapsed.
Meanwhile, in the capital, parts of the oil infrastructures, including fuel depots, were targeted, which caused serious concern about air pollution and the long-term risk of water and soil contamination. And speaking of infrastructure, US President Donald Trump recently threatened to target Iran's power plants, although he later said the strikes would be delayed. Iran says it will retaliate.
Free tacos for everyone.
Still, in case
Come and
of
get
such
them
an
while they're
attack,
hot.
It will be ordinary citizens once again to bear the burden. Tawhid Asadi, Al Jazeera, Tehran.
Well, the Israeli military has announced it's expanding its ground invasion in southern Lebanon, warning of a lengthy offensive.
Bibi is a
Spokesman
warmonger.
for the UN
What do you want?
Secretary General says Israel continues to attack healthcare facilities there. He expressed concern about the growing refugee crisis.
As of today, the WHO reports 64 attacks on healthcare facilities, resulting in 51 deaths and 91 injuries, further straining an already fragile health system. Displacement also continues to surge. Our humanitarian colleagues tell us that more than 1.2 million people, or around 1 in every 5 residents, have been forced to flee their homes. More than 130,000 people, including some 46,000 children, are currently sheltering in more than 600 collective sites nationwide, most of which are already at full capacity.
Humanitarian crisis
Our
all over
humanitarian
the place.
colleagues warn that these figures will rise further as hostilities intensify, with Israeli authorities announcing plans to escalate ground operations along the Blue Line.
Israeli forces have destroyed bridges they said were used by Hezbollah to cross the Litani River in southern Lebanon. Now they've cut off the main highway between the capital Beirut and Tyre, one of the largest cities there. Zaina Khudr has more from Qasmiya in the south.
As we make our way towards the south of Lebanon, there are no signs of life. We are on what used to be the main highway to the city of Tyre. But we've had to make a diversion to the coastal road. Israeli strikes have made that route impassable. They've also disrupted lives.
This is the only route that can be used to leave or reach the southern city of Tyre after the Israeli army destroyed the bridge on the main highway. The Israeli military is warning worse is yet to come. The military saying that they are preparing to deepen its ground offensive in southern Lebanon and its airstrikes against Hezbollah.
Sick of my tax dollars funding this shit
Israel
too.
hit the M51 highway
Enough's enough.
after declaring all bridges over and south of the Litani River targets. The destruction of the Qasmiya Bridge cut off the easiest route to the western sector of southern Lebanon, making it more difficult for people who still live in Tyre and southern villages to survive. Israel says Hezbollah used this to bring in weapons and fighters. For those who still haven't left their homes in the area, this was
as long as
a
Israeli
critical
says
lifeline
it must
to
be
bring
true,
in food,
right?
medicine.
Just like Trump.
It's not known how many people still live here as Israeli troops push further into Lebanese territory along the border. The Lebanese army has had to abandon some of its positions south of the Litani River. The state is not a party to the conflict, and while it declared Hezbollah military activities illegal earlier this month, it's been unable to confront the group, which is promising to fight until the end. It's come at a cost. More than 1 million people have been displaced and more than 1,000 killed, and the number is climbing. The Qasmiya Bridge was not the only one targeted by Israel in recent days. In fact, the Israeli military has been destroying infrastructure across southern Lebanon, whether it's fuel stations, bridges, even paramedics and health centers have come under fire. It seems to be part of a strategy to depopulate the whole southern region. The area is under Israeli evacuation orders. Those who stay know the risks, but say they have little choice.
I am still here because this is my land. This is my home. I don't want to leave it. And there are no places to go.
So much has already been lost, while Israel says fighting with Hezbollah is only just beginning, as it gradually isolates the south of Lebanon from the rest of the country. Zana Khuder, Al Jazeera, Southern Lebanon.
UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer says Britain must prepare for a prolonged conflict with Iran while continuing to push for de-escalation. Well, he's welcomed reported talks between the US and Iran, saying the government has no concerns about energy supplies.
Since the conflict started, I've been really clear with the team that we mustn't fall in to the sort of false comfort of thinking that there will necessarily be a quick and early end to this. We have to plan on the basis there may not be.
The Kremlin says it hopes the situation regarding Iran will soon return to a peaceful course. Russia also says it's seeing contradictory statements about talks with Iran and is continuing to monitor developments closely. Yulia Shapovalova has more from Moscow.
In the short term, Moscow can benefit, of course, from the rise in oil prices due to this conflict. However, this will not cover the political costs. And if we talk about a protracted conflict, if the whole situation triggers a global crisis, its consequences could be quite unpredictable for Russia too, and the world economy may show signs of recession, may slow down, and countries like China and India won't be able to buy large amounts of Russian oil, which will lead to some, undesirable consequences for Russia. Plus, the demand, for Russian other raw materials may decrease, which will fully or partially offset the effect of rising oil prices. And earlier on today, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and Minister of Foreign Affairs of Iran Abbas Araghchi had a telephone conversation, and Sergei Lavrov expressed his concern about the situation in the Gulf region, and he spoke about the danger and unacceptability to US and Israeli strikes on Iran's nuclear infrastructure, including the Bushehr nuclear power plant, as the strikes create unacceptable security risks for Russian personnel working there and could lead to catastrophic environmental consequences for the whole region. And Russia's Rosatom is building the Bushehr nuclear power plant there, and not so long ago, Rosatom employees arrived in Moscow, but still hundreds remain there. And
Thanks,
we
Billy.
know that Rosatom has said that
Like and
the
subscribe,
state,
everyone.
corporation has no plans to withdraw
About
from
15
the
minutes
Bushehr
left to go
nuclear
on the
power
stream.
plant and will continue the construction of the second and third units there. So basically, the Russian side has urged an immediate cessation of hostilities and the need of a political settlement of the conflict there.
Well, as we've been reporting, financial markets are reacting dramatically to Trump's announcement. Oil and gas prices plunged immediately. Brent crude was trading at nearly $110 a barrel just before Trump's post. The price fell sharply to $96 before hovering back up to around $100 a barrel. European natural gas, well, that dropped by more than 9% at the announcement. The price had risen sharply since the start of the war. Adam Bell is a partner at Stonehaven, a global consultancy group. Now, he says despite the positive reaction to Trump's announcement, the markets remain cautious, waiting for clearer signals of tensions easing in the Middle
Because
East.
everything could flip on its head tomorrow.
The markets are responding to what is very limited information. They know that Trump has backed away from his original ultimatum. They haven't heard from the Iranians whether these talks are in fact real or ongoing, or whether this is something that Trump has used as a way of climbing down from his original precipitated threat to the sector, which would have resulted in an Iranian response.
Trump has no idea what the word duplicitous means.
Will continue, at least for the intermediate period. Whether this is a full conflict with a purely disruption to Hormuz is unclear. There's a world where the Americans back out, the Israelis continue bombing, and Iran continues to block the straits. There is a world in which everyone goes home tomorrow. The markets seem to assume that we're in for at least another couple of weeks of disruption, possibly longer. But of course, they're running on, as I said, limited information. It's important to remember that before the crisis, oil prices had been almost at the kind of in the historic doldrums. They weren't really pushing towards 100, mostly because they'd seen significant demand destruction within the Chinese market, as well as in Europe. And as well, of course, as shale oils coming on stream in America. Going back towards those low prices would certainly be a welcome relief for the Gulf states who rely upon oil for their livelihood, but it would very quickly put back some of the questions around more rapid decarbonisation that have become increasingly pressing in Europe.
Many countries are bracing for the economic fallout of the Middle East conflict. Pakistan is concerned about the strain on already fragile finances. The government has announced sweeping austerity measures, warning it could become even stricter if the war doesn't end soon. Kamal Haider has more from Islamabad.
The blowback from the intensifying conflict in the Middle East is already wreaking havoc when it comes to countries like Pakistan, struggling with a fragile economy. The Prime Minister made a speech to the nation on the eve of Eid al-Fitr holidays, saying that the government was trying to offer maximum relief to the people. However, he warned that with the escalation in the Middle East, the situation could indeed mean that they will have to revisit the plans. He announced austerity measures, saying that the federal
Trump wreaks havoc everywhere he goes, and he doesn't care.
Parliamentarians will take a 20% cut.
He doesn't care how many economies he destroys, including his own.
A 60% reduction of the usage of government vehicles. However, it will not apply to health services. The government has also decided to save on energy costs by shutting most of the educational institutions, who will now, of course, be working online, and also saying that there will be a 4-day weekend for Pakistan in the coming days. It will be important to see what happens within the next few weeks, but people here in Pakistan who've celebrated a somber Eid are preparing for the worst.
Prices are very high this time, so we could not do much shopping for Eid. Our parents asked us to keep the celebration simple because expenses are hard to manage this year. We wanted a happy Eid, but this time it is very difficult.
The situation is getting worse with every passing day. We hear about fuel subsidies on TV, but the real relief seems to go to the elite class. Poor people use very little fuel, while luxury vehicles consume much more. The government should cut its own spending instead of burdening people already struggling with skyrocketed inflation.
Pakistan, of course, is importing 80% of its oil and fuel needs from the Persian Gulf. Any prolonged closure of the Straits of Hormuz would have a devastating effect on Pakistan's economy. It should be noted that these austerity measures will last for a period of 2 months. However, people across Pakistan who have celebrated Eid on a somber and austere note are expecting the worst to come. Kamal Haider, Al Jazeera, Islamabad.
The world's largest warship has arrived in Greece after a fire on board last week injured sailors and caused significant damage. The USS Gerald Ford carries more than 5,000 crew members and 75 aircraft. It'll dock temporarily at a NATO base in Crete.
Sure.
US officials said nearly 200 sailors were treated for smoke-related injuries. The vessel has been deployed for nearly 9 months and was sent to the Middle East as part of US operations against Iran. Let's take a closer look at some other news now. It's been 5 months since the war in Gaza ended, but on the ground, not much has changed. The vast majority of the 2 million people living there still living in tents, waiting for humanitarian aid. They say there's no evidence of a large-scale reconstruction effort. Hani Mahmoud reports from Gaza City.
So it has been 5 months since the ceasefire and the start of what is called Phase 2, meant to bring further Israeli military withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, beginning of reconstruction. But here in Gaza, reality looks very different. Conditions remain frozen in Phase 1, and around 2 million people are still displaced in tents like these.
From what I'm seeing, no, I don't think so. For the past 6 months, they've been saying the same things about moving from one phase to another, but nothing has changed. Gunfire keeps happening again and again. The last time, a quadcopter drone opened fire on me and my wife.
Humanitarian aid is still limited and inconsistent. Basic services remain under pressure. And for many, daily life is still about survival, not recovery. Phase 1 was meant to stabilize the situations. Phase 2 was supposed to move things forward, but neither has it translated into a meaningful change for people here. People have been saying that aid is only trickling in and there is no large scale of reconstruction efforts and no clear return of displaced families to their homes, and there is a limited progress toward normal life. What was meant to be a transition toward recovery has instead become a prolonged state of limbo. So before talking about the third phase of the ceasefire, disarmament and the entry of stabilization forces, the question remains whether Phase 1 and Phase 2 of the ceasefire have actually achieved anything. Because for most people here, life has not moved forward. It simply has stayed the same. Hani Mahmoud, Al Jazeera, from Gaza City, Palestine.
A pilot and co-pilot of an Air Canada plane have been killed after colliding with a fire truck while landing at New York's LaGuardia airport. Dozens of passengers have also been injured in the incident. Images from the scene show significant damage to the front of the plane. The airport is expected to operate at reduced capacity for some time now. And police in the UK say they're investigating a suspected arson attack on 4 vehicles belonging to the Jewish Community Ambulance Service in London. Authorities say they're treating the incident as a hate crime. Prime Minister Keir Starmer described the incident as deeply shocking. Charlie Angela reports from London.
This is the moment police say 3 suspects set fire to ambulances in North London, captured on security cameras. Police are investigating the arson attack as an anti-Semitic hate crime. No one was injured, but gas cylinders inside the ambulances exploded, blowing out windows and forcing people to evacuate nearby flats. By the time fire crews arrived, 4 ambulances had been destroyed, reduced to charred shells. They belong to Hatzolah, a Jewish volunteer emergency service that serves the entire community. Golders Green is one of London's most established Jewish communities, and there is shock, but also a sense that this is not unexpected.
It's an outright miracle that no person was injured, and this was an act of sheer evil. We're discovering new lows to which awful, wicked people are reaching in their desire to intimidate and terrorize the Jewish community, but it's not working.
Yep, and they're being funded by Americans.
We're
so
acting with fortitude.
What are you going to do?
Responding with
Our tax dollars.
Counter-terrorism
Funding
police
the
are
dogs
leading
with
the
rabies.
investigation, but it is yet to be formally declared a terror incident. Police say they're also assessing an online claim of responsibility, but it has not been verified. Soon on the scene, the government health secretary arrived with this message.
I know that the Jewish community will not be cowed by this despicable act of evil.
It's possibly, Billy.
But it is the responsibility
Those kids were already out several months more than they were supposed to be. Somebody might have started it on purpose.
Needs to stand up and speak up
I wouldn't blame
against
them.
this vile anti-Semitic hatred.
Police say that they will be highly visible in this area in the coming weeks, increasing their patrols and working with faith leaders. But there is a sense that this issue needs a broader, more long-term response than immediate reassurance on the streets. Charlie Angela, Al Jazeera, London.
A neighbourhood in the French capital is at the centre of a growing dispute. The Château Rouge district is a major area for Africans in Paris. Hundreds of shopkeepers there are fighting a controversial nighttime curfew imposed by city leaders. Natasha Butler has the story from Paris.
Not far from Paris's famous Montmartre district is the Château Rouge neighbourhood, long considered the heart of the city's African community. Shops here once stayed open until 9 or 10 at night. Now they must close at 8 under a nighttime curfew imposed by local authorities. Esther Pierre says the measure is hurting her business financially.
It's not good for us. Now customers have to rush to try and get here after work, or they just buy online instead. But we don't sell online.
Authorities say the curfew discourages unauthorised vendors, reduces noise and antisocial behaviour. But some traders, including Najat Mestawi, say it's unfair. She says it disproportionately affects businesses owned by people in the African community. She also says the council is unjustly blaming the shops for what's happening in the streets.
There are illegal vendors everywhere because the council fails to manage them. The council thinks if we force the shops to shut, the vendors will go. But when I close at night, they're still there, so they can keep working when we're not allowed.
While some shopkeepers here are unhappy with the curfew, some residents say that they welcome it. They say they're fed up with the illegal street traders, the noise and the rubbish.
The Paris where we live, I mean, it's messy, it's dirty, it's sometimes you feel insecure.
Pedro Lopez is part of a residents' association. He says the curfew isn't about discrimination, but quality of life.
What I'm asking is that we live in a place where we can walk, where we can take our kids in the street without being harassed by people drinking.
Some 300 shopkeepers are now challenging the curfew in court. A judge will have to decide how to protect the rights of residents and shopkeepers without shutting out one of the communities that's long shaped the neighbourhood's identity. Natasha Butler, Al Jazeera, Paris.
Faced with its worst economic crisis, Cuba's government says it'll allow foreigners, including Cuban Americans, to invest in private businesses. The law isn't new, but the state has been reluctant to implement the measure. Now, the United States is unwilling to authorize private investment, though. Our Latin America editor, Lucia Newman, reports from Havana.
Power cuts in this Havana neighborhood have become the norm, even before President Trump imposed a total fuel blockade 3 months ago.
I've been without power or water for 19 hours.
Why water?
Because without electricity, the water pump doesn't work.
Cuba's electoral grid has been
another humanitarian crisis created by Trump.
From lack of investment.
He's really good at this stuff.
Calculates it would cost almost $10 billion to modernize it. The opportunities for infrastructure investment are in fact endless. Take housing.
It's not just that the houses are falling apart, it's that they are inhabited, absolutely full of people, families living one on top of the other, where once upon a time there was only one or perhaps two. Just take a look at this. It's dark in here, it's humid, and there are these pipes here that bring in the water because there is no proper running water at all. Look at this door. This is the entrance to one living quarter. I don't know how many people live here. And then just above, there are other people. Everything, absolutely everything has to be rebuilt.
The same goes for streets and highways. Or water pipes that in parts of Havana haven't been replaced since the 1930s. Transportation and communication infrastructure is outdated. And the agricultural sector is crying out for massive investment so that the largest island in the Caribbean can produce its own food.
And then there's recreation, like golf, for example, which for many people, including the U.S. president, is an absolute necessity.
4 years ago,
You
the
hopped in
government
right
said
at the
it would
end.
allow foreign and Cuban investors to run private companies. But so far, a legal and financial framework that guarantees investments is absent. Economist Omar Evelleni says that a while back the government sent him to Vietnam to see how the private sector worked, but his findings were ignored.
I don't care if it's this one or not, but we need a state that thinks differently, that is decentralized. For example, China and Vietnam are centralized politically. They have a communist party, but very different from ours, which wants total control of the economy.
Many, including the U.S. Secretary of State, argue that the only way to revive Cuba's economy is to replace its political system. But others believe that the Cuban state could survive, but only if it abandons outdated economic controls driven by ideology that have failed everywhere. Lucia Newman, Al Jazeera, Havana.
We're going to take a short break now, but do stay with us. The news continues at the top of the hour, and of course, there's always.
All right, guys. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Love you all. See you real soon, probably in a couple of days.